I used to think I knew every sound my land could make. Wind slipping through dry needles, a branch popping in the cold, coyotes yipping somewhere way out past the creek. But that Tuesday morning, right after sunrise, the forest made a sound it had no business making, a low, mechanical growl that rolled through the pines like thunder with a muffler. My old shepherd, Duke, stopped so hard his nails scraped the dirt. Ears up, body tight. That dog had the kind of instincts you don't argue with. I followed his stare toward the tree line behind my back pasture, the part of the woods that slopes down into the Ridgewater Preserve. 200 acres of protected land, officially. Unofficially, it was my family's history. My dad helped replant that ridge after a wildfire back in the 80s. When he finally donated a chunk of it to the state, he told me, "If you ever hear machines in there, you don't wait to see what they're doing. You stop it." I didn't even finish my coffee. I grabbed my phone, slipped my binoculars into my jacket pocket, and cut off the trail into the brush, keeping Duke close. The air was dry, already warm, that late summer kind of heat that turns everything into tinder. And the closer we got, the more obvious it became. Backup beeps, metal clanks, chain rattle, the sound of a loader working underweight. Then I saw it through a gap in the branches, and my stomach just dropped. 2 flatbed trucks, idling. A small loader. And stacked beside them, neat like a warehouse inventory, were fresh-cut logs. Clean, straight, uniform, the kind of pine you don't thin for fire safety. The kind you sell. Then I caught the door logo, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a forestry company. It wasn't the state. It was our HOA. Clear as day on the driver's side door. Brookstone Hills Community Association. Our little neighborhood seal in green and gold like it was a badge of authority. For years, the HOA had been a nuisance. They wrote me up for leaving my garage open too long. They threatened fines because my mailbox was non-uniform. Once they claimed my porch light was the wrong color temperature. Petty stuff. Annoying. But this was theft. This was federal land, state-managed, protected. And my HOA trucks were hauling it out like they owned the place. Duke let out a low growl, and one of the workers looked toward the tree line. I ducked behind a fallen log, heart hammering. I started recording, but my angle was trash. I could see movement, tires, flashes of reflective vests, but not faces, not plates. I knew better than to step out there alone. Confronting a crew in the woods is how people end up on the evening news for the wrong reason. So I backed out, quiet and slow, and the second I hit the open trail, I made calls. First call was to a friend at the county environmental office, a woman named Marisol Avery. We'd crossed paths years ago when she needed access to old property surveys my dad had kept like sacred scripture. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail so tight and controlled my voice didn't even sound like mine. "Marisol, it's Grant. I'm looking at HOA trucks inside Ridgewater Preserve right now. They're loading cut timber. This isn't brush. It's prime pine. Call me back." I hung up, stared at the tree line, and felt this slow burn rise behind my ribs. Because the truth hit me all at once. They didn't do this by accident. You don't bring flatbeds and a loader into protected woods by mistake. That's a plan. That's an operation. That night, I barely slept. I replayed the footage I had, grainy and partial, and it made me angrier because it wasn't enough to nail them. Around 11:30 p.m., my phone finally rang. "Marisol, say that again," she said. "HOA trucks," I told her. "Logo and everything. Inside the preserve." Her tone changed instantly, from friendly to sharp. "Send me coordinates. Anything you have. If they're operating past the boundary, that's not a code issue. That's criminal." I pulled out my dad's old maps from the lockbox in my study. Thick folders. Deeds, surveys, easements, letters. The kind of paperwork that smells like dust and stubbornness. I found the one that mattered. The conservation boundary overlay, signed and stamped decades ago. And there it was. The spot where those trucks were working wasn't near the line. It was well inside protected land. I sent Marisol the coordinates and a photo of the map. She called me back 2 minutes later and said the words that made my jaw clench. "Grant, the HOA filed a request a couple months ago to reduce density for wildfire mitigation. They might be using that as cover." "Cover for what?" I said. "They're not cutting deadfall. They're harvesting." There was a pause. "Then you need proof of the exit," she said. "Not just that they're in there. Proof that the logs leave the preserve and go somewhere. Plates, route, staging. If we catch that, we can move fast." I looked over at Duke sleeping on the floor like nothing in the world could surprise him. Fine, I said. Then I'm catching it. The next morning, I went out before sunrise, not on the main trail, but down an old service lane my dad used during controlled burns. Most people in Brookstone Hills didn't even know that lane existed. That was the point. I parked, walked in quiet, and within 10 minutes I found the scar. A newly carved road, wide enough for trucks, cutting straight through the woods like somebody took a knife to a painting. Fresh stumps, churned soil, no signage, no permit tags, no safety markers, just raw, hurried damage. When I reached the staging area, it had grown. 3 trucks this time. A generator. A bulldozer parked under the trees like they were building a subdivision. And standing there, crisp polo shirt, clipboard, clean hands, was the last person I wanted to see. Nolan Pritchard, HOA board member, self-appointed director of grounds and risk prevention. A title he basically invented so he could boss people around with a straight face. Nolan was the type who treated bylaws like scripture and authority like oxygen. He once tried to fine me because my fence stain was too rustic. And now he was in protected forest, overseeing a logging crew, looking relaxed, like he expected 0 consequences. That scared me more than the trucks. People who fear the law hide. People who think they're untouchable stand in the open. I backed out again, went home, and went to war the only way I know how, paperwork and patience. I scanned every map, every letter from my dad, every conservation covenant. I found a notarized page from the year he donated the acreage, plain language, no wiggle room. The land was to remain untouched except for state-supervised ecological work. No private extraction, no fire mitigation loophole. I sent the whole packet to Marisol. Her response came fast. This is bulletproof, she said. But we still need your clean proof of transport and destination. And Grant, do not confront them. I promised I wouldn't. Which was technically true. I didn't plan to confront them. I planned to catch them. I set up on my loft window with a long lens camera and a notebook like I was staking out a bank robbery. Around 3:40 p.m., I saw dust rise behind the tree line. A flatbed rolled out, loaded heavy with clean logs, HOA logo on the door. I got the plate. Crystal clear. Then it took a turn that made me go cold all over. It didn't head toward any public forestry checkpoint. It drove straight into the neighborhood, down the service road, and pulled behind the community clubhouse into the utility lot where they stored decorations and mower equipment. Except now, tucked behind the fence, were stacks of logs under tarps like somebody was building a secret inventory. That's when my plan changed. I didn't charge in screaming. I parked on the street, walked up slow, and called out to the driver like I was just a nosy homeowner. He was young, maybe mid-20s. Work gloves, reflective vest. Didn't look like a criminal. Looked like a guy trying to pay rent. Hey, I said. Where'd those logs come from? He froze. Maintenance run, he said. Fire safety. I nodded like I believed him, then pulled out my map folder. Fire safety doesn't look like 30-year pine cut into perfect lengths, I said quietly. And your route runs through Ridgewater Preserve. That's protected. You know that, right? His face changed. Not anger, not arrogance, just uncertainty. Like nobody had told him the truth. I just go where they tell me, he said. They said Zone C. I almost laughed. Zone C doesn't exist, I told him. It's a made-up label so you don't ask questions. That's when I felt someone behind me. I turned, and there was Nolan Pritchard striding across the lot like he owned the ground under my boots. Button-down shirt. Clipboard. That calm, practiced smile that says I'm about to talk down to you. Grant. Nolan said, like we were old friends. Always a pleasure. Any issues here? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I just held up the folder. Your trucks are pulling timber out of protected land, I said. I have plates. I have route. I have boundary maps and conservation covenants. So I'm going to ask you one time, Nolan. Are you out there logging inside the preserve? His smile stayed, but his eyes hardened. We're mitigating risk, he said. Approved by the board. The board can approve whatever fantasy you want, I said. It doesn't change state law. Nolan leaned in, voice dropping. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I felt something in me go still. No, I said. You made it big when you decided to steal a forest and call it community improvement. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just turned toward the driver and said, too loud, get back to work. That told me everything. I went home, sent Marisol the plate numbers, the lot photos, and a short summary of the confrontation. She replied with one line that felt like a door finally opening. "This triggers state and federal involvement. Call the sheriff next time you see movement. We're ready." And sure enough, the HOA sent me a letter the next day. A cease and desist. They accused me of harassment, interference, and trespassing in restricted HOA zones. I laughed so hard I scared Duke. Restricted zones. They were literally stealing from protected land and had the nerve to threaten me with legal language. That's when I knew they were scared, because bullies only file paperwork when they can't win in daylight. 3 nights later, close to midnight, I heard engines again. Not the usual daytime rumble. This was stealth, headlights off, slow crawling movement in the trees like they believed darkness made them invisible. I stepped onto my back porch and looked toward the ridge. The air was dead quiet except for that low mechanical grind. Duke came to my side, stiff and watchful. I didn't grab my map folder. I didn't grab my notebook. I grabbed something else, my drone. I'd used it for deer spotting and checking fence lines after storms. Tonight it was going to be an eyewitness. I launched it from the edge of my pasture and watched the feed come alive. Thermal overlay painting the forest in ghostly whites and reds. 2 trucks. A loader. 3 men moving between stacks of logs and fresh stumps. And one bright, jagged heat signature that could only be a running chainsaw. At midnight. In a preserve. That was not fire mitigation. That was theft in progress. I hit record, then started streaming the feed to a cloud backup. If they found me, if they smashed my gear, the footage would still exist. Then I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and kept my voice steady like my dad taught me. "This is Grant Halden," I said. "I'm reporting active illegal logging inside Ridgewater Preserve. I have live aerial footage of HOA trucks and unauthorized equipment. I can provide coordinates and plates." The dispatcher asked if I was safe. "I'm at a distance," I said. "I'm not engaging." "Good," she said. "Units are on the way. Stay put." I waited, jaw clenched, watching the drone feed as the men kept working, like the forest was theirs and consequences were a myth. Then, about 20 minutes later, the first flashing lights appeared on the far access road, blue and red slicing through the trees. The crew below panicked instantly. One man ran toward the loader. Another jumped into the flatbed and tried to reverse down the carved road. But it was too late. A spotlight blasted across the clearing. Voices shouted, "Sheriff's office. Kill the engine. Hands up." On the drone feed, I watched one guy bolt into the trees. Another dropped to his knees. A third tried to rip a clipboard out of the truck cab and shove it under a tarp like paper could save him. The next vehicle that rolled in wasn't a patrol car. It was an unmarked black SUV. And when the door opened, a man stepped out wearing a plain jacket with a small emblem that made my throat tighten. State Environmental Enforcement. That's when I knew it wasn't just me anymore. They were there. The operation I'd stumbled into had finally hit a wall. By the time I hiked back down to my house, my phone buzzed with a message from Marisol. "They got them in the act. Federal liaison is on scene. Your footage is locked." I sat on my porch steps next to Duke and let the night air fill my lungs. Relief hit first, then anger, then something heavier, grief, maybe. Because even if they arrested every last person involved, those trees didn't grow back overnight. The next morning, the news broke locally. HOA vehicles seized in a legal timber case. Then it went bigger. Community board under investigation for environmental crimes. 2 days later, a federal agent showed up at my door. He didn't threaten. He didn't posture. He shook my hand and said, "Mr. Halden, your documentation turned suspicion into evidence. We're building a conspiracy case now." A conspiracy. That word made my skin prickle, because it meant this wasn't one rogue board member. It was a system, a plan, paper shields and fake labels and quiet midnight truck runs. The agent asked if I'd testify. I said yes. He asked if I had any reason to fear retaliation. I almost smiled. "They already tried to intimidate me," I said. That's how I knew I was close. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. Once the bad guys get caught, people don't just celebrate. They argue. Half the neighborhood acted shocked, like corruption fell from the sky. The other half acted annoyed, like I'd ruined their property values by calling attention to the rot. And Nolan's supporters, the ones who loved his strong leadership, started whispering that I was obsessive, vindictive, that I hated the HOA, and finally got my revenge. That's when I realized something ugly. Some people will defend a thief if the thief wears the right polo shirt and uses the right words. Fire safety, community standards, risk mitigation. Sounds so clean. Until you see the stumps. Until you hear chainsaws at midnight. Until your childhood forest gets reduced to tarped stacks behind a clubhouse. So yeah, I testified. I handed over the maps my father kept. I turned in every plate number, every photo, every minute of drone footage. And I watched the neighborhood I'd been treated like an annoyance and suddenly look at me like I'd done something they didn't have the spine to do. But I also watched the preserve get barricaded off by the state, new signage posted, restoration crew scheduled. And last week, I took Duke back to that ridge. The scarred road is still there, but grass is starting to push through the tire ruts. Small saplings have been planted where stumps used to be. And for the first time in a long time, the forest sounded normal again. Wind, birds, no engines, no beeping, no metal chains clinking like somebody loading up your inheritance. I stood there, and I thought about my dad's old line. Stealing from the earth is stealing from your grandchildren. I didn't understand it when I was a kid. I do now. And here's my question for you, because this is where the comments always explode. If you lived in my shoes, would you have called the cops on your HOA, knowing it could blow up your neighborhood, get you labeled a troublemaker, maybe even make you a target? Or would you have kept quiet to keep the peace? And bigger than that, why do so many people excuse theft and corruption when it's wrapped in community management and polite emails? Drop your take below. Was I right? Or did I cross a line by turning a neighborhood dispute into a criminal case? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that abused power, or you've seen someone use rules to cover something rotten, tell that story. I read every comment. Hit like if you want more real-world stories where the quiet guy finally stops swallowing it. Subscribe if you believe accountability matters even when the guilty party wears a badge that says volunteer. And I'll see you in the next one.